Britain's medicine regulator has advised that people with a history of significant allergies do not get Pfizer-BioNTech's COVID-19 vaccine. This warning came after 2 National Health Service workers reported severe adverse reactions on the first day of vaccine rollout. Both workers are recovering, according to the NHS Medical Director, Stephen Powers. Britain began mass vaccinating its population on Tuesday, starting with the elderly and the frontline workers. Pfizer had said people with history of allergic reactions were excluded from the late-stage trials. The new guidelines from Britain's medicine regulator, the MHRA, also include a much broader segment of people that should not take the vaccine.
One of those so-called cruises to nowhere, a much-hyped cruise trip with no destination port to keep with travel restrictions, has apparently backfired because a COVID-19 case was found aboard one from Royal Caribbean and has now forced nearly 1,700 passengers into isolation. The cruise, which was only open to Singapore residents, was meant to be sailing just off the city-state and planned no stops. Now the Quantum of the Sea ship has been forced back to port, authorities said. All passengers had cleared a mandatory test for the virus up to 3 days before the cruise started on Monday. But an infected passenger, an 83-year-old male, had reported to the onboard medical centre with diarrhea, and passengers were told of the infection early on Wednesday. One passenger, Melvin Chu, described his shock hearing of the infection.
And given all these precautionary measures, it is quite uncanny or bizarre to actually find out that there actually is a COVID patient on board.
Royal Caribbean and the Singapore Tourism Board said all guests and crew of the ship who had close contact with the infected guest had subsequently tested negative for the virus. The passengers and crew will stay on board in their rooms until contact tracing is complete. Then they will undergo mandatory COVID-19 testing before leaving the terminal. Singapore, which has had just over 58,000 cases and 29 deaths, has been reporting less than a handful of local infections in recent weeks.
As coronavirus cases in the U.S. soared past the 15 million mark, overwhelming hospitals and forcing new restrictions in pockets across the country, approval of a vaccine could be just around the corner. A panel of outside advisors are set to vote Thursday on whether to recommend the FDA issue an emergency authorization of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Health officials predict a swift green light, enabling the U.S. to join Britain, Bahrain, and now Canada.
At last, we have a reason to feel optimistic,
which approved the vaccine Wednesday, saying it is safe, effective, and of good quality. Now attention shifts to the U.S., where approval rests with the FDA, an agency that U.S. infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci says you can trust.
If the United States Food and Drug Administration says that a vaccine is safe and effective, I can promise you that I will take that vaccine myself, and I will recommend that my family does that.
In a virtual conversation with Dr. Sanjay Gupta on Wednesday, Fauci hailed the coming vaccines, but warned Americans not to let their guards down.
If you've been vaccinated, you probably still need to wear a mask. Am I right? Because you could still be carrying the virus, potentially transmitting it, even if you're less likely to get sick yourself.
Absolutely. There's no doubt. So wearing a mask, physical distancing, avoiding crowds, that should all stay as we get into the vaccine program.
A vaccine can't come soon enough for many Americans, like California's Jim Albrecht.
So I feel real confident. I'll be there day one.
Health professionals are preparing for the rollouts, like the University of Wisconsin-Madison Health System, which recently began training staff on how to mix and administer it. The help is urgently needed. The U.S. averaged over 2,000 deaths and over 200,000 new cases each day for the past week, a staggering toll that U.S. health officials warn is likely to accelerate.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel is pushing for harsher lockdown measures as the country faces record numbers of recorded coronavirus deaths. Most recently on Wednesday, 590 people were lost. In an emotional plea in the parliament, Merkel warned legislators that vaccines alone would not alter the pandemic's course.
Und so hart das ist, und ich weiß, wie viel Liebe dahinter steckt, wenn Glühweinstände aufgebaut werden.
As hard as this is, and I know how much love has gone into setting up the mulled wine stalls and the waffle stalls, this is not really compatible with the agreement to only get food to go and then to actually go home with it. It hurts me, it really aches in my heart, but if the price of these niceties is that our fatalities are now at 590 people a day, then this is not acceptable, and so we have to tighten this.
Und deshalb müssen wir doch.
Germany, which was praised by international health organizations early in the pandemic for its aggressive response to coronavirus, has been in partial lockdown for 6 weeks, with bars and restaurants closed. But infection levels remain at a high level. Under Germany's federal system, the power to impose restrictions lies with regional governments. Some state leaders, especially in less affected regions, have resisted Merkel's push for tighter measures. In the run-up to Christmas, other European countries are trying to navigate between avoiding the spread of COVID-19 and allowing people to celebrate. Italy, which also recently saw a new death record, has announced that midnight mass on Christmas Eve will be cancelled and travelling between regions are banned. Ski resorts would also be closed over Christmas and New Year's. In Spain, up to 10 people per household will be allowed to gather for the holidays, but curfews will be in place.
The United Nations has said it's alarmed after one of its convoys was shot at in Ethiopia's Tigray region at the weekend. Though the government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who was visiting Kenya on Wednesday, says that the UN vehicles failed to stop at checkpoints. UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric.
These are alarming reports, and we are engaging at the highest level with the federal government to express our concerns and avoid any such incidents in the future.
The 4-person security team was seeking to access the Shimelba camp for Eritrean refugees as it assessed roads for aid delivery, Dujarric said. 2 diplomatic sources said they encountered Eritrean soldiers, though both Addis Ababa and Asmara, who made peace in 2018, have denied Eritrean soldiers are in the northern region. The Ethiopian government says that the UN vehicles passed through 2 checkpoints without stopping, while driving towards an unauthorized area. Redwan Hussein, spokesman for the government's Tigray task force, said that when they had tried to break through the 3rd checkpoint, they were shot at and detained. He added that Ethiopia does not need a babysitter for relief operations. Despite agreeing an access deal with the Ethiopian government, some aid agencies have grown frustrated with the difficulties in reaching parts of the northern region. Thousands are feared dead in the conflict that broke out a month ago, and the UN estimates that more than 950,000 people have been displaced, around 50,000 of them to neighbouring Sudan. The Ethiopian government did not immediately respond to a request for comment on the UN estimate.
Indian officials are looking into how they can tweak new and controversial laws that deregulate parts of their agriculture sector that have sparked mass protests by farmers since last month. Protests so far-reaching, it's even prompted thousands into the streets of London, which has a huge Indian community, thousands of miles away. The government has put off a second day of talks with farm groups. The new laws loosen rules around the sale, pricing and storage of farm produce and had protected farmers from an unfettered free market for decades. Small growers in particular feared that they will be at the mercy of big businesses if they are no longer assured of floor prices for staples such as wheat and rice sold at government-controlled wholesale markets. A federal government spokesman said that in response to the protests, the government decided against rushing into a planned second day of talks without first coming up with some proposals that help soothe the farmers' anger. The protests pose a major challenge to Prime Minister Narendra Modi as he seeks to reform the vast agriculture sector, which makes up nearly 15% of India's economy and employs around half of its 1.3 billion people.
Mount Everest is even taller than was previously thought. That's according to Nepal and China, whose governments say they've finally settled a long-running dispute over the height of the world's tallest peak, which straddles their shared border. At issue for Beijing and Kathmandu was whether to include the summit's snow cap. Nepal traditionally used the estimate made by the Survey of India in 1954, and that included snow, while Beijing had sent an expedition that measured the mountain in 2005 at nearly 4 meters lower than that estimate, without counting the snow. So last year Nepal sent its first team of surveyors, followed by China again this year. And at last they've agreed.
3, 2, 1. Please press the crystal ball.
The official height is now 8,848.86 metres, or 29,031.69 feet. That's about 3 feet more than the 1954 survey. Another factor in settling on a height at last was the 2015 earthquake in Nepal. Mountaineers thought it could have altered Everest's height, especially since a near-vertical rock formation just below the summit, called the Hillary Step, had collapsed. Despite the tiny adjustment, some are already saying they look forward to scaling Everest's new heights.